You are listening to Fika with Vicky on United Public Radio, 107.7 and 105.3 from New Orleans.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fika. Our guest this week is Nick Roberts. Nick is the author of Anathema, The Exorcist House, and his latest book, It Haunts the Mind and Other Stories, just out last week, which was #1 in new releases on Kindle, paperback, and hardcover in the horror short stories category. Way to go, Nick. I haven't read anything from the horror genre for a while. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was just something that happened. And you got it. I was scrolling through social media. I saw an ad for The Exorcist House for 99 cents. And who doesn't like a good Exorcist anything novel? I downloaded it and was instantly involved in the hair-raising anticipation that is horror. But these novels go deeper than the monsters and that haunt the characters. And I found myself taking in the story at two levels, which merged to create an in-the-moment experience. And isn't that what stories should do? They should give us an experience that makes us feel. They should give us an experience that makes us think. And in the case of Nick's books, they give us an experience that makes us run to our beds at 2 a.m. looking for safety and comfort. But that could just be me. Welcome to Fika, Nick.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
How are you today?
I'm doing well. I am recuperating from driving up to StokerCon for the Bram Stoker Awards, and then up in Pittsburgh, and then immediately driving down to Holden Beach for a family gathering, and finally just cruised in back home and about 20 minutes ago. So I'm road worn, but I am still ready to go. Always ready and willing to talk about some spooky stuff.
Well, thanks for jumping on and talking to us. We really appreciate it. Before we get started with the actual conversation, could you give our audience an idea of what your books are about?
Sure. So I guess the through line, the themes with my books center around sort of obsession, addiction, grief, trauma, and all those feel good topics. But I always put entertainment and the scares, because I do write. I write in the horror genre. I put that first and foremost. You can embed all the social commentary you want into the greatest, most well-written prose. And if it's not entertaining, if it's not engaging and no one reads it, what's the point? So that's why I like someone like a Jordan Peele, a director like that who can, make you think as well as entertain you and scare the daylights out of you. That's why, he's inspiring. But my books, I hope I can achieve that. That's always a goal, is to have it mean just a little bit more than surface level scares. And it's I feel like you have to, for me at least, I start with a feeling, with an idea, and then I kind of develop, well, how can this go into the horror genre? Because horror is beautiful. It's a beautiful vehicle for metaphor. Mm-hmm. Because people go to theaters, they read scary books to be entertained and to be scared. They don't go there looking for life-changing literature. And if you can, like with William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist novel, which is, in my opinion, the best horror novel ever written, you can go into that knowing you're going to be traumatized and walk out of it with, like I did when I read it when I was 16, questioning these thoughts that a 16-year-old I'd never thought of. Like, like, what's going on in the universe? What's life after death? What's, these existential thoughts. So, to sum up my overly long answer to that question,
take as long as you want.
I guess my books are scary with substance, horror with heart. I'll go with that.
Okay, I think that's good. I think you should write that down and use it on the banner on your social media thing or wherever you put it. That was good. And it goes the other way. It's regardless of genre, if the story isn't good, it's about a story, regardless of genre. Right? But you do write scary stuff. I mean, this wasn't my first rodeo of reading a horror book. We've been down. I've been around for a while, but I am telling you, I was downstairs reading because the old muscles were getting stiff, and suddenly I was like, "What is happening to me? I need to get out of here!" Like I could feel that thing on the back of your shoulders, and I thought, "Wow, that takes a lot after reading as much as I have." To cause that reaction. So good for you. Not so good for me, Nick, but good for you.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's the reaction that I'm going for, is a visceral physical reaction. Horror and comedy are the same in that way, and that they tend to elicit a physical reaction in the reader or the viewer. And often, they go hand in hand. One of the greatest scares in movie history is in Jaws, and it's when Sheriff Brody's throwing the chum off the boat, and he's the other guys on the boat are giving him crap about it, and he says, "Well, why don't you come down here and chum some of this?" And then all of a sudden the shark pops out of the water. So it gives you that laugh and then that scream, and then if you see it in a theater, you get that collective laugh again, that, hey, we're all safe, we're in a theater, we're experiencing something terrifying, but we're safe. And it's the same way for me with books. I love when people tell me they feel like that they're looking over their shoulder when they're reading something that I wrote, or that they're thinking about it after they put down the book. Because I can read certain scary books, and I can watch certain scary movies, and they may startle me in the moment, they may spook me, creep me out, but once they're off and over, a couple days later, they're out of my mind. I think the great ones are the ones that stick with you.
Right. And it is in that moment that you aren't thinking about anything else. It is what clears your mind. It's that scream, that laugh. Like you are in that moment right then. And that's a beautiful feeling to have. And you have a talent to bring that off. Now, you talked about some of your inspirations. Is that what drew you to horror? The ability to be physical and stretch the brain?
I think what drew me to horror, honestly, was being born in the month of October and having my birthday is October 17th. So I naturally looked forward to the spooky month of the year, because that's my birthday. And then Halloween's right after, and Halloween's cool. So as soon as that time of year started rolling around and all the scary movies would start playing on TV, and you'd see all the Halloween decorations go up, I started to feel giddy and excited. And I remember, this is going to age me a bit, but I remember walking the halls of Blockbuster and looking up at those gorgeous VHS horror covers. And when I was way too young to do so, I'd sneak away from my parents in the store and go find the horror section always. And I always tried to sneak a movie in there. I succeeded once, but was always caught. But as far as literature, I would have to say Goosebumps was my first. The first book I would read cover to cover, and first chapter book I'd read cover to cover, and then Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark was a very terrifying, but it also inspired me to want to write scary things, because Goosebumps is spooky. It's, you know, it's very kid friendly, and scary stories to tell in the dark. You know, it's for kids on paper, but you still read those stories and you see those horrific ink drawings, and it's quite terrifying. So,
ink drawings. What were they thinking?
Yeah, there's no color whatsoever. It's just these just terrifying black and white drawings, illustrations. But you know, encountering that and seeing that, whoa, I can actually get scared from a story, and also, you know, simultaneously enjoy drawing. So I would draw these creatures and draw monsters, and then, you know, as I got a little older in elementary school, I'd put little dialogue bubbles, and I'd start making my own books, and I'd have characters talking to each other, and get a stapler and staple all my pages together and show it to my mom, who was a teacher at the time. And, you know, she was my first fan, and she would encourage me to keep going no matter how dark it was. I mean, she would say, you know, this is a little weird, you know, this is a little out there, but she never stifled my creativity. She fanned that flame, and she actually, you know, when I was in first grade, I wrote a pretty dark story, but it was so well written that it warranted a parent teacher conference. And I remember the principal had said that, you know, this is some dark content for a first grader, but it's very well done. And, you know, my mom just kind of laughed it off. She's like, "That's Nick. He's just into that kind of thing. There's, you know, there's nothing going on up there that's bad." And, you know, she was always there to support me. And, you know, I'm sure she wishes that I was more of Nicholas Sparks than Nick Roberts, but she always encouraged me, no matter, you know, which direction I went creatively. So yeah, that's where the horror bug was planted, was very early on in childhood.
And that support is so important to anyone who's working in, because you're sitting behind that desk for hours at a time, for days at a time, with no, you know, here's your paycheck, you know, good job, get a gold star. You have no idea where it's a work of faith.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember, I think I was in junior high when we got our first PC in the house, and I got on the internet and found a website where anyone could submit short stories, and it was kind of like a social media before social media, I guess, where like message boards where people could go on, read your story, and leave comments. And up until that point, the only audience I had was kind of like my mom and maybe a couple of my aunts. You know, my older brother and my sisters had no desire to read what I wrote. So I remember uploading a story from one of my little floppy drives onto this website. And then I went to bed. I remember waking up feeling like it was Christmas morning, because I was going to have some honest feedback. And I ran to that PC. I logged on, and I saw that there were 3 comments. I was like, oh my goodness, people are reading my stuff. You know, strangers are reading my stuff. And yeah, I don't even remember what the comments were, but it's important to have that audience. And as, you know, as a parent myself now, I try to do the same thing, to encourage the passion of my kids, whatever that may be.
So I saw that you did indeed thank your mother and your aunt, at least in Exorcist house, for their support at the beginning. That was a nice touch.
Yes. So my aunt, she, I used to deliver newspapers as a kid, and occasionally I would stop by her house when I was really little, and I have a new monster drawing or a new short story, and I'd knock on her door with her newspaper and say, here's your paper. I also have a new story if you want to buy it for $5. she would always buy it. So and she was a lifelong English teacher. She was my first beta reader on most of my stuff, you know, so had to give her props in the Exorcist house.
I guess so. It's not, you don't usually have an English teacher hanging around to just edit your work and proofread. I mean, that's kind of a lucky thing for you.
Right.
So this is all what made Nick Roberts the writer that's how you came about with the horror and the writing. I'm going to, hi, Brian. Brian is here and he has a question. And I'm going to put that up. So that everybody can see it. In terms of influence on your writing, did you ever read the older writers such as Lovecraft or Poe?
Absolutely. So Poe, he's in my favorite horror short story collections, up there with, you know, one of the Stephen King ones and Clive Barker's Books of Blood. The complete works of Edgar Allan Poe, I mean, what else can I say that hasn't been said about it? I mean, his poetry is brilliant, and I don't like poetry, but I can read his and, you know, his short stories, the way he's able to put you in the mind of a person who is mad, and you, not mad in the angry sense, but crazy. And the scary thing is not that you're doing these acts in the first person as one of Poe's narrators. It's that you kind of empathize and sympathize with them a little bit. And I think that may have freaked a lot of people out at the time when they're reading like The Telltale Heart. And all of a sudden they might be relating to the main character a little bit. Or they're reading The Cask of Amontillado and they understand why this killer is going to kill this guy. And will he get away with it? Do I want him to get away with it? You know, so I love Poe. I've always been aware of H.P. Lovecraft. He's always been on my radar. Of course, I understand his influence on the genre, on pulp culture. I've seen many H.P. Lovecraft films. I mean, not that there are many direct adaptations, but there are quite a few that are directly inspired by Lovecraft. They are Lovecraftian. Now, this past year, I actually have the book up on my shelf and bought the complete works of H.P. Lovecraft and read it all. Because, I mean, of course, you have the controversy with Lovecraft and, you know, can you separate art from the artist and all that. But as a student of literature, I read it. As a, you know, fan of horror, I read it. Some of the prose were dense, as I knew going in, but the man had an ability to create a sense of dread and a sense of place and bring out fears that may be uncomfortable for certain people to read. And I can see how problematic, you know, some of the stories are viewed through today's lens. However, it still achieves what he set out to achieve. You know, he can write some terrifying stories that do stick with you. And you know, Poe and to answer the question, yes, I read the old stuff. I love the old stuff. Sometimes, you know, I'm in different horror groups on social media, and it's easy to fall into the trap of reading the new stuff as it comes out and forget about even books that came out 10 years ago. So I always try to go. A great source for me is the library and the library app for audiobooks, because then I can scroll back and see things that I actually wouldn't kind of run into naturally on my own within my own circle. But yes, I do love the classics.
So you are Well, you're just amazing at researching your genre. Like you've done your homework. You've seen what you like. You use that in your work as far as, because I can see how getting in the mind of the antagonist, making people feel things because you do, how you work those ideas into your own work. So do you think that's important that writers research their genre?
Yeah, absolutely, because it can be easy to almost rehash the same ideas and throw out the same tropes, which I'm certainly not against tropes whatsoever. If you've read The Exorcist House, it's full of exorcism, possession, haunted house tropes. The difference is, or what I attempted to do, was bring something new to the table, subvert things, a little bit without doing it just because. And the knowledge of what has been written, and if you have a good solid foundation on the classics, I feel that a lot of people don't. And if you're able to, pull from that, get that tool out of that toolbox and bring it to your writing, it's I think it's better for everybody. Before I wrote The Exorcist House, I went and read, and I'm not an extremely religious person by any means, but I went and read the entire Bible. I went and read Milton's Paradise Lost, and I had to, I read the Rites of Exorcism, the Catholic Rites of Exorcism as translated out of Latin, because I had to know all that, because I didn't want people to read it and say, that's not how it goes. And it may just be one Catholic priest who's reading that and says, hey, we don't do that. I don't want that to happen. So, there's a lot of biblical references in The Exorcist House, specifically with like the Garden of Eden and the book of Genesis and all that. And, I was completely oblivious to, I was a novice in that area.
Well, I was going to say, I'm actually surprised that you say you're not that big into religion, because the person that read that book, I thought for sure was big into religion, because you had all the stuff there. So that's what I just want to say. It's just amazing how you turned that information into the book.
Yeah, it's hard. I'm definitely a very spiritual person. It's something I try to maintain a connection with a higher power that, and I'll do that through meditation, through, prayer, through, I've gotten into this thing called the Wim Hof method, which is like these breathing exercises and physical exercises. All these help my anxiety and help me stay calm and focused. But as far as organized religion, it's hard for me to get behind some of the things and see past the politics that are embedded in today's religion. So yeah, that's a tricky one for me.
No, I hear you. Are you looking for a new best friend, or no? I'm just liking what I'm hearing. So you do your research, and you go back and you look at the older books and the classics. When you start a book, do you have I'll say monster. Do you have the monster in mind, or does the monster develop through the characters that you have already developed?
So this is going to be kind of difficult to talk about without getting into spoiler territory. So I will say that when I started writing Anathema, my first book, I heard you say anathema.
Oh,
Half of
Anthema? Okay.
Anathema. Yeah.
Anathema.
I put up so many people, everybody so many people call it anathema that I had my daughter, she's 6, and I have like a promotional poster that's framed and it's on a tripod, and I take it with me to signings and things like that. And I had her get my yardstick, and she pointed to the words anathema, and she said, anathema, anathema. And I posted that on social media as everybody's pronunciation key, and that kind of went viral. So
I should have looked at that because I just went on YouTube to my regular pronunciation.
Yeah.
Guys, and the problem with YouTube people is that they'll give you 3 different pronunciations. So I just take the average one, and it was apparently incorrect today. So it's say it again.
Anathema. So
Anathema.
with anathema, I definitely had a concept of the antagonist, and I wanted to say a concept of their motive, but they don't.
You knocked that out later on, so
yeah. So I had a concept of the antagonist, and basically their function in the story. Because the story begins with a young couple who have had a rocky past dealing with addiction and infidelity, and they have a young son who has been witness to some of that and maybe a bit traumatized, and they're all doing well now. And they move into they're looking for a fresh start, and they move into a new townhouse in a nice little subdivision that's kid friendly. And unfortunately, the townhouse that they move into is kind of in the middle of 2 other ones, and they hear things about one of their neighbors on kind of one of the sides of the house that they're connected to, and they begin to experience missing items in their house, things moved around. They learn that the woman that lives next to them supposedly has, brain illness and doesn't get out.
Okay, let's stop there. Can you finish your thoughts without telling any more of the story, or do you have to?
Well, that's on the synopsis on the back of the book.
Okay, all right. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure. Okay.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so I have the young couple moving in, and each one has their own demons that they're carrying with them. And I'm speaking metaphorically. And Brian, he is the husband, has anger issues, and he's the one who was unfaithful in the relationship. And his wife Ellie has addiction and issues, and she's in recovery. So they both have their own demons, and they're moving into this townhouse. Now, the concept of taking a step out of the story, I said, I'm a person in recovery. I've been in recovery since April 15th, 2012, and I've noticed that quite a bit of characters portrayed on TV or books or movies, whatever, that are in recovery, it's like their character arc is will they or will they not stay sober. That's it. Like that's the depth of their character. The
extent of their story.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, and that's kind of the opposite of recovery, in my opinion. Recovery is just living your life just like any other person. You're not fighting to stay sober. And you're not fighting to stay sober. It's just been removed. And as long as you continue to work on yourself and better yourself and do certain things, life just keeps getting better. And that's been my experience. And I know a lot of people with that same experience. And so I wanted to have this character of Ellie, the wife, who's in recovery, with a solid recovery foundation. She's not like 28 days sober and getting thrown out into the society unprepared. And I wanted to have her, a person in recovery, go up against basically the ultimate evil. Anything that draws, that, can pick on your demons, that can, bring out the worst in you. And I wanted to show people that, what could happen, within that scenario. And, that was the primary goal going into writing Anathema, was depicting an authentic character in recovery. And with the antagonist, I knew what that was going to be, and the manipulation that was going to occur there.
Well, first of all, I think that, to me, Ellie is the strongest character in that
Thank
book.
you.
Are you Ellie? I was talking about Ellie.
Yeah. So I am half and half. I'm half Brian, half Ellie.
I can see that. And I want to remind the audience that last week we discussed that if you're going into sensitive issues or certain life experiences, it is best to ask somebody, get a consultant, someone that can tell you what that really is, so that you can have authenticity and not get rid of half your audience by writing the wrong things. And in this case, Nick was his own consultant, and he's very open about that. And I think doing a lot of good work because of his openness in that area. But I do think Ellie was the strongest character. And I do think that if she were allowed to just continue the way she was thinking and the way she was doing things without interruption, you wouldn't have a story, or you wouldn't have an ending like that. It would have been, but others made her doubt herself. So if you were to write a generic horror story, because they all sort of have some things in common as far as, how they play out. There's a monster and you have to fight the monster or whatever.
Sure.
I found in this book that in these novels that it was actually the things they brought into the situation, the things that were, their baggage, afraid of not being perfect or not being masculine enough or not being protective, that caused the bigger problems. If they had just listened to themselves, they would have just called in an exorcist and walked out the door. So if you were to give someone in a horror story real life advice and didn't care about finishing your story in an interesting way, what would be that advice? What would you tell a character in such a story?
Get a therapist, particularly a cognitive behavioral therapist that can help you process your thoughts, take a step back and analyze your thoughts so that you're able to see how your mind influences your actions, and you're able to work on your communication skills. Because had there been more communication in both of my books, there would have been one chapter.
I think that, but I mean, I'm constantly yelling at books or TV sets saying, would you just talk? And then yeah. I tell myself, yes, but if they did, there wouldn't be a story, right? It would be straightened out. So yeah. I think most books do not have good communication amongst the characters, because
and that's one thing that that's feedback that I got from the Exorcist house. Some of the criticism was, why aren't they talking to each other? They're supposed to have this good relationship. Why aren't they speaking? They could knock this thing out. Why aren't they talking about the things that are happening? Well, there are other factors at play that I could answer that with. But, taking that criticism has helped me grow as a writer. And with my third novel, Mean Spirited, that's coming out March 2023 through Crystal Lake Publishing.
Oh, it's March already?
Yep.
Oh,
yeah. So I finished that book over a few months ago, actually.
You mean March 2024?
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No. I just want to make sure I was hearing right. Old lady, remember Nick? Okay.
Yeah. It is. It's coming out next year. Mean Spirited, March 2024 will be my third novel, and I do have a short story collection that just came out, but that'll be my third novel. But I took the criticism from the Exorcist house of that communication barrier because it bothered some people, and I said, I'm going to take a look at that, and I'm going to have these characters communicate without it being like meta, like the Scream franchise, how they're always, the characters are ahead of the horrors because they're more knowledgeable about the situation in which they're in. So I did take a look at that, and I kept that in mind when I was writing Mean Spirited. Anytime something happened, I had to be that character, and I had to be like, I need to talk to somebody about this. This was something weird that just happened. I need to, somebody needs to, either I'm going crazy or we're in jeopardy. So both warrant a discussion. But in the Exorcist house, there are other factors at play that kind of prevent those open discussions.
Yeah. I swear I'm going to do a show that says spoilers only. You can't watch this show unless you've read the book. So we can really get into it. Okay. It is very difficult, but I hear what you're saying. Now, Mean Spirited. Does this continue the other stories in any way, Nick?
No.
Okay, so, it's a completely different thing.
Yeah, so with the success of the Exorcist house, that was completely unexpected, unplanned, unprecedented for the publisher. It went viral. It blew up on TikTok. It blew up in Facebook groups, specifically this Books of Horror group on Facebook that has almost 40,000 members, and it exploded. And it's Crystal Lake Publishing's best-selling novel to date. It made the preliminary ballot for the Bram Stoker Awards, even though it didn't make the final ballot, so I can't say I'm a Bram Stoker nominee, but it was in the top 10 with Stephen King, and Stephen King and I both got cut. So I'm in good company there.
Yes, you are.
So I kind of knew that if I wanted to crank out another The Exorcist House 2, that I could easily do it, and it'd be a cash grab, honestly, because I didn't have a passion for a story. I told the story I wanted to tell, and I had no desire to revisit that world. So I wrote Mean Spirited, which, if you liked Anathema and The Exorcist House, I think you're going to love Mean Spirited. My wife, who is by far my biggest critic, says that Mean Spirited is her favorite novel that I've written. So that might be the blurb I put on the front of
because I will trust a wife's opinion.
Yeah, this book by my husband does not suck. Next one. But so with Mean Spirited, I wrote something completely different, and shopped it around to different agents because I'm with Crystal Lake Publishing right now, and they're a kind of a middle range publishing house. They're definitely not a small independent press. If you're going to publish, with an indie press, Crystal Lake is the top of the food chain. And you see that by how many Bram Stoker awards their books, garner. And that the publisher actually won a Bram Stoker award a couple of years ago for being, the best indie publisher. So I have nothing but great things to say about working with them. However, as a writer and a teacher, my ultimate goal is to, step out of the classroom, be a full-time writer. That's been my dream since I was a kid. So I needed to take that step up, and I submitted to a bunch of agents. Well, I take that back. I submitted to a select few agents that I knew were getting books out there. I looked at the authors the horror authors who are successful and like are getting published by the Simon and Schusters, you know, by the Random House,
Right.
all that. So I found those agents, sent them the synopsis. I had a few of them request the manuscript, and both of them, these were the two that I wanted the most. Both of them said they loved it, but they didn't think they could sell it to a publisher at this time. And because that's not what publishers are buying, this type of horror. They wanted more ambiguous, in like the vein of like a Paul Tremblay. So I said, okay, I can, you know, I get that. If you don't think you can sell it, then I'm not going to waste your time, you know, and sign and, you know, have it sit there on your desk. So, but to get into those bigger houses, you have to have an agent. Those bigger houses do not accept unsolicited manuscripts. So that was the reason for that, for the agent search. And I gave myself a time frame, and I said, you know, when I hear back from them in, you know, a few months, you know, if I don't hear anything good back from them, then I'm going to go with Crystal Lake again, because I had such a great experience with the Exorcist house, and I believe that this publishing house is going to blow up, and you know, they're in the process of doing that. I can't talk too much about it, but so they're releasing Mean Spirited, and after I signed the contract for Mean Spirited, it was like, I don't want to say divine intervention, because I would say it's undivine intervention, because I said I had this sudden thought about the Exorcist house, and immediately I thought of the film The Godfather Part 2. And you know, the way that movie is told structurally is that it has, you know, it flashes back in time to the young godfather, the patriarch of the family, coming up and becoming who he becomes as the godfather. It also goes in the present day, flashes back to the present day, to where you have that man's son now running the family and his corruption or his ascension in the crime family. So you have these simultaneous stories that parallel one another. It's not just arbitrarily thrown together. And it's very enriching and engrossing. And people, the fans of Exorcist House, they wanted a prequel, because in the book there is certainly room for a prequel. You know, you're dealing with an old man exorcist at the beginning who's had a long career of being an exorcist. So there's certainly room for a prequel. And, you know, by the end of the book, people wanted to know, well, what happens next? So
yeah, you did leave it open, Nick. Like,
I took the Godfather. I don't think I left it open.
There's so much more.
If this was a spoiler-free or a spoilers, if we could be spoilerific, I could explain why I don't think I left it open at all. But there is so much more that I could write there. But I'm saying that if I didn't write another sequel, if I didn't write a sequel to The Exorcist House, the clues are there as to what's going to happen. But anyway, so I had this structure in mind of writing a prequel/sequel hybrid. And that's what I'm currently doing. It's by far my most epic in scope and ambitious work to date. And I'm about 5 chapters into it. Again, I'm having to do all this research. And just a little teaser, I'm having to do a lot of research with the Weston State Hospital in West Virginia for the criminally insane, which is now the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum and a tourist attraction. So, yeah, I'm in that part of the writing process. So I found a passionate story in the Exorcist House universe that I think will satisfy both fans who wanted a prequel and a sequel.
I'm not quite sure how that prequel / sequel thing, it works. But I'm excited that there's going to be more in the story.
Yeah.
Because if we didn't have spoilers, I would tell you exactly why you left it open. So, anyways, we're supposed to be discussing other things, but I'll take this question from Brian, and then we'll go into. He says he likes the library that you can glimpse behind you. Do you prefer to read hardcover or ebooks?
I definitely prefer to read hardcover. It's just, and it's only because I've never read on a real Kindle. I have the iPad with the Kindle app, and people say that it's not as good. So I've dropped many hints that I want one of these really good Kindles to my wife. So maybe on my birthday, something might happen there. But I love to hold the book in my hand. It's just easier. However, the option that wasn't listed there is the audiobook. And honestly, with my busy lifestyle, I'm driving a lot, and I do exercise, for about an hour a day. So while I'm driving and while I'm exercising, I'm on Audible or I'm on Libby listening to audiobooks, and that's how I knock out most of my quote unquote reading, which I consider it is reading. Yeah, so audiobooks, although I don't prefer them to physical books, that's how I consume most of my reading, excluding like advanced reader copies and things like that I have to read and write blurbs for.
So I was going to say, when you get older, you might appreciate the Kindle, the e-reader. I'm not advertising the e-reader option, just because you can make the words so much bigger. You're not looking for a large print all the time. It becomes more comfortable, but it is a nicer thing, because I did read on my phone before, and I just lost the interest in reading. So yeah, go for the e-reader. We discussed before the show that an important thing to you is your work with people with substance abuse disorders. And I think one of the ways you do that is through your writing, because you do create, like Allie, and you explain I don't know how to Nick, you just have a really good way of putting those feelings and those thoughts from the character out there for other people to pick up. And I think in doing that, you do a great service in this area.
Thank you. First of all, I do believe that putting a face behind the disease of addiction will help stop the stigma. It may encourage more people who are facing substance use disorders to, ask for help if it's not such a stigmatized issue. And, when I went back to college, I got my bachelor's in English and my master's in teaching. And then I got my doctorate in educational leadership. And when I was getting hired on as a teacher with my own history, I had to go through quite a rigorous background check. I had to, explain quite a few things, and justifiably so. People were putting their children under my care as a teacher. And, I just went through a very rigorous process to get hired on. And as this opioid epidemic is increasing, the amount of people that are getting in recovery and staying sober is also increasing. Couple that with the national teacher shortage, and there is a surprising amount of people in recovery getting teaching certificates, and especially since they're lowering the requirements to be able to be a teacher. So my topic for my dissertation, for my research, was stigma associated with the disease of substance use disorder as it relates to the hiring practices. And, I found some interesting research, I got some honest feedback, and, some of it made me mad, but I could see their side. Some of it gave me hope. And, it seems like the more people who have had positive interactions with people in long-term recovery are more accepting of, the ability for people to change in general. Like, some people just flat out don't believe it's possible.
That's unfortunate. That belief is out there. Now, you said when we were discussing it that you were an open book. And I think about your characters in the story, and that we have already discussed, it's not a spoiler, that they have their things that they hide, their secrets. Do you feel that shame is also one of the great contributors to this, the fear to ask for help, because it may reflect upon the way people think of the individual?
In my book, my collection of short stories that came out this last month, it has a lot of short stories in there that aren't necessarily horror, that deal explicitly with characters in active addiction. In my novels, these are people in recovery,
right?
For most people. Now, with the short works, one of the characters that I relate to a lot is from the short story I wrote called The Deal. And it was actually the first story I had published. And it came from a thought that I legitimately had when I was about 22 years old. And keep in mind, I'm a creative mind. This was never going to come to fruition. But this random thought of, there's no way, like, I don't want to live sober, and I can't imagine going on the rest of my life this way either. So I was completely hopeless. So I said, I was watching a gangster movie, and I said, the only thing that could help me, I think, is if I hired a hitman to come and kill me in 5 years if I don't get sober. That might motivate me. So I had that thought at that time. So when I sat down and I was, sober, and I was wanting to submit a story to this literary magazine called the Blue Mountain Review. And I wrote this story about this 20-something-year-old kid who legitimately hires a hitman, a low-rent hitman, to come back in 5 years. And if you're not, sober, having relationships, going to college, whatever the goals were, if you're not these things, then you're getting taken out. So that was the first story I had published, and that was my most personal, I think, because it shows the hopelessness that people have in active addiction. It hooked me up to a lie detector test, and I would say those people are fake who are sober. There's no way. I couldn't imagine life not only sober, but being happy. And it is possible.
So thank you for that. Thank you. Okay, so back to your, and I haven't read It Haunts the Mind, but definitely looking forward to that read as well. You have, and people he has written for magazines as well. Do you want to say anything about that, Nick? Anything recent, or is that sort of your learning ground?
So before I wrote Anathema, I had the deal published, and that having that publishing credit, seeing my name under a story in print, a new addiction sprung. And I said, I want to write another story. And I was writing these stories for free under the guise of quote unquote exposure. And which is good and bad. It's good to build up a list of credits, a list of publication credits, because when you submit to maybe a bigger or more prestigious magazine, then having that backlog of published works looks good. But, it's also, you want to make some income, and trying to get paid to be an author is a lot harder than it may seem. And I remember when I published when I got my first paid short story published, and that was with Sinister Smile Press, and the acquisition editor, she was actually from West Virginia, where I'm from, and it was called The Devil's Road, and she loved the story. I got paid, a real writer's fee, and that was actually what enabled me to be able to be a member in the Horror Writers Association, be an active member, because there are different tiers, and being a paid writer, earning a certain amount of income keeps you at that active writer status. And that was kind of a feather in the cap moment for me, was when I made my first dollar, with my imagination. So it kind of baffles me now that I'm paying bills with it.
Well, it's not baffling me. So you have Mean Spirited coming up in March. Yep. You're working on the sequel / prequel, whichever way you want to go first.
It is called The Exorcist House Genesis, and that is signed the contract for that. It is coming out September 2024, just before Halloween.
Oh my goodness, that's one that already has a date. So, September 2024. 2 books in the year. All right. Yep. Excellent. You're really working on that paycheck. Getting it. Okay. Now, you have a newsletter that you have out there, and people can keep track of this and what else is happening with you, because Nick's going to get so big, he's on his road, that this is the only time we're going to get to talk to him.
No. Anytime.
So, where can they go to get your newsletter?
You can go to my website, www.nickrobertsauthor.com. And from there, you can, it's right at the top. You can click sign up for the newsletter. It's called Nick's Spooky News. I won't spam you, I promise. I send it out once a month, and it's just a general update of what's going on with my projects. And sometimes there are some giveaways for people who open it and read it, and some behind the scenes type of stuff. And on my website, you can also get all kinds of other merchandise and learn a little bit more about me.
Yes, because when you get to know the writer, it gives you a little extra into the story. Okay, it really does, as it did today. So I want to. Anything else, Nick? Do you think we covered everything?
I think we covered everything. One more thing I wanted to say is the people who pick up my new collection, It Haunts the Mind and Other Stories, I put a notes section at the end of that, and I write a note about each story that's in the collection. So like that story that I just told you about, the deal, like that story, that behind the scenes little paragraph story is in the back in the notes section. So my advice reading this collection is, after you finish a story, flip to the back, find the story you just read, and read the inspiration or the story behind it. And I feel like it's a much more enriching and
the whole picture.
It'll pull you in.
Also, on a more superficial note, Nick has some cool merch, like I Survived the Exorcist House t-shirts and mugs. So if you want to help him out and his dream of just being a writer, you can go in and check those out. So thank you so much, Nick, for coming and joining us today, and for sharing your story. And you people know I don't share it unless I believe in it, and I definitely believe in Nick's work. So you take care, and I'll be reading your words and questioning them, Nick. I'll be questioning them.
Always, always. I will have the answers.
I'm still on that open thing. You take care, and we'll talk again. Okay?
All right.
Bye.
Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So that was a fantastic talk with Nick today. And I've just about talked out. So until next week, may your coffee be hot and your story sweet. Oh. I gotta find the music. Okay. Thanks for listening, everyone.